Hi everybody, welcome to Maton D tutorials. This is our first tutorial. It's part of the series that I'm going to go through. So today we're going to be talking about Enterprise Java Beans, right? So this first tutorial that we're going to do is going to be an overview for Enterprise Java Beans. We're not going to go into much detail because we're going to do that in the next chapters to come, right? So what is an enterprise Java bean, right? So by definition, enterprise Java beans, it is a technology or an architecture that is used for building highly scalable, robust, distributable, and reusable applications, right? So if you look at this definition, there are about four key terms that we have in this definition, right? The first one, which is scalable. So what do we mean by scalable? Scalable, we're saying when you're developing an application using enterprise Java beans, it's very easy to scale either horizontal scaling or vertical scaling without having to change the core logic for your application, right? So robust, we are saying, because of the way enterprise Java beans are developed or are used when developing an application, it's very easy to maintain that kind of an application. It's very easy to change the business logic without having to impact so many areas or so many components or so many parts of your application, right? Then distributable, was saying enterprise Java beans, it goes hand in hand with the scalable one. So enterprise Java beans, the same enterprise Java bean that we have developed, it can be distributed among or distributed on different server nodes or application nodes. That's what it means, distributable. Reusable, was saying you can develop a component once using enterprise Java beans and you can reuse that very same component amongst other components, right? So these enterprise Java beans, they're often abbreviated as EJBs. That is, in the Java world, you hear a lot of people saying EJBs, then you know they're referring to enterprise Java beans, right? So enterprise Java beans, they can also be described as server-side components that contain business logic, right? So the reason why they're called server-side components is because these components developed using enterprise Java beans, they cannot be run as jars like we do with your normal Java Standard Edition. You have to deploy them onto an application server. That's why they're said or called server-side components, right? And one of the key things that we have here in this statement is that they contain business logic, right? So if you look at that MVC pattern, right, or if you look in layered architecture structure, right, the EJBs, they are part of the business layer structure or the services layer structure, right? EJBs are meant for building your business logic for your application. They are not meant for building your web browser. They're not meant for building like any other layer, your client layer or your presentation layer. They're meant for building your business layer or your service layer, right? So like we mentioned just now, that EJBs, they're server-side components. They have to be deployed into an application server for them to be executable, or for them to be able to be in that runtime mode. You have to deploy them into a Java EE compliant application server. There are a couple of Java EE compliant application servers in the market. Some of them you have to purchase, pay for licenses, but a lot of them you can just download them. They're open source like WildFly, JBoss, and your Glassfish, among other application servers like your Oracle WebLogic, right? So let's move on to the next slide, right? So an EJB, like we said, it's a server-side component and all those other stuff, but how do we come up with an EJB, right? So we're saying an EJB is basically a Pojo class. So a Pojo class, by definition, it's a plain old Java object. That's a Pojo class, right? So you can see from the screen, the first part that we have there, we are showing as an example as a Pojo class, where you just define as your public class account, right? Excuse me. Then the example just below that, we're saying if you want to convert that Pojo class into an EJB, all you have to do is just to annotate that class with its EJB annotation. Then you're done. So we are saying an EJB is simply a Pojo class with an annotation at EJB. That's all it is, right? So I'm sure the next question that's coming to your mind now is, if a Pojo class is being turned into an EJB by just putting that annotation, why do we need to use EJBs instead of just Pojo classes, right? So now we're going to discuss about the advantages of EJBs over Pojos, right? So in EJB container, it will provide system level services such as security and transaction management. So if you are developing an application using EJBs, you don't need to worry about how you're going to handle your security, because it comes out of the box by virtue of you developing an application using EJBs. Just need to make use of annotations, right? The same applies with transaction management. You don't need to develop from scratch your transaction management. It comes out of the box with EJBs. You just need to make use of annotations and pick the right transaction management for your specific scenario, right? You can make use of declarative transactions. These are the annotations that we're talking about. You really don't need to write code or application code or separate code to handle your transaction management or your security. You just make use of declarative transaction or declarative security, right? The other thing is EJBs are cached and put. Their life cycle is managed by the application server, right? So it's saying EJBs, you don't need to worry about managing the life cycle of the EJB. The life cycle of the EJB is managed by the application server, irrespective of the application server vendor that you're using, because they are all Java EE compliant application servers, right? They know how to manage an EJB, the life cycle of an EJB. EJBs are cached and pulled, and this enhances application performance as compared to when you're using normal Pojo classes where you do your lookups and all that, right? Another thing is EJBs, they can be clustered and distributed without having to make code changes. So the EJB that you write once today, you can distribute it or cluster it onto other several nodes. Let them be 5, 20, or 100 nodes without having to make code changes. The very same EJBs, they can also be remotely accessed by different clients, right? So you can have your EJBs running on node A. Let's say the application server is called node A. You've got several clients that are going to be making remote calls to these EJBs. Let's say maybe you've got interfaces that you have with your suppliers or your customers. They can access this EJB, look up the EJB remotely, and invoke the necessary business logic, of which this is something that you can't do with a normal Pojo class, right? So there are a couple of other advantages that you get for using EJBs over and above just using Pojo classes. But for now, this are sufficient enough for this tutorial, right? So let's talk about the types of EJBs. So basically there are 3 types of EJBs. The first one, which is called the session bin, the second one being the message driven bin, and the last one, which is called the entity bin. This entity bin, we're not going to discuss much about it because this entity bin has been replaced what is now called JPA entity bin, right? So let's talk about session bin. The session bin is an enterprise server bin that contains business logic that can be invoked by clients programmatically, right? So these clients, they can either be local clients where you have to do a local lookup, or they can be a remote client, or they can be a web service client, right? So a session bin data is not saved to the database, right? So we are saying a session bin, it only contains the business logic or the process flow or the necessary flow for an application, but this data from a session bin is not saved to the database. If you want to save data, you have to make use of something, another type of an enterprise Java bin, not a session bin. All right. But for the processing of your business logic, for the processing of information, you make a call to a session bin. So the lifecycle of a session bin does not extend or exceed the range from the beginning until the end of the usage of the system by the user. So we're saying When the system starts up, the session beans are loaded, or the connection, the pool is initialized, the EJB pool is initialized, right? When the system goes down, all those EJBs, they go down with the system. Their lifetime does not exceed the lifetime of the user or the lifetime of the application itself. So session beans can be classified into 3 categories, which is stateless session beans, stateful session beans, and singleton session beans. We're not going to discuss about these 3 types of session beans for now. We're going to have separate tutorials where we're going to discuss about each and every one of the session beans in detail, right? So let's talk about this message-driven bean. So remember, we said it 3 types of enterprise Java beans. The first one is the session bean. The second one is the message-driven bean, right? So the purpose of a message-driven bean is to allow enterprise applications to process messages asynchronously. You see, there is already a big difference. We said a session bean contains business logic. We're saying a message-driven bean, which is often abbreviated as MDB, we're saying the purpose of this one is not to contain business logic, but to allow an application to process messages asynchronously, right? So unlike a message session bean, right, an MDB cannot be accessed directly by the client irrespective of the client type. So by us saying this, we are saying an MDB, right, is not accessible to any client. So how does this MDB gets activated? How does the MDB run, right? So what happens is messages are sent onto a message broker like ActiveMQ, RabbitMQ, your typical queue, whatever messaging broker you're using, right? And this MDB will be listening for messages on this message broker, right? So at the moment a message is received on the message broker, right, the MDB will pick up this message. Remember, we said the MDB is listening. The MDB will pick up this message, pass it on to the respective message handler for business logic processing. So this handler for business logic processing will most probably be a session bean, right, since it contains the business logic processing, right? So we are saying an MDB cannot be accessed directly by the client. So how does it get activated? And MDBs are stateless in nature, and they're only activated on receipt of a message from the message broker. That's how they're activated, right? So we'll go into detail in the next couple of chapters. We'll go into detail about message-driven beans, how to write, how to develop a message-driven bean, what are the parameters that you need to put on your MDB for it to listen for messages from a queue, which interfaces to implement. We're going to final details in the next couple of chapters, right? The last type of session bean, which is the entity bean, we're saying the purpose of an entity bean is to represent data that can be persisted to the database, right? So remember, we said a session bean, right, the data from a session bean is not persistent, but the data from this entity bean is persistent. That's what we're saying. So this type of bean is mapped to a database table, usually by an ORM. ORM was in its object relational mapping technology, like JPA or your Hibernate. So what this ORM does is it looks at the properties or the attribute that you have in your entity bean and maps it onto a table. So this attribute are mapped onto a table columns, right? So in a nutshell, this type of bean is persistent, right? So if you're running your application, these entity beans, you can use them for doing your inserts into the DB, for updates, for deletes, for viewing operations and all that, right? When the system goes down, this information has been persisted to the DB. So these entity beans, their life cycle extends the normal life cycle of a user or the normal life cycle of the system going down and coming up again and all that. You find this data has already been persisted into the DB, right? So the lifetime is not in any way related to the interaction with the client as they are persisted to the DB, right? Over and above this, these entity beans, they're shared amongst the clients, right? So another client can make use of the same entity bean to do an insert, another one can make use of the same one to do an update, another one can make use of the same entity bean to do a delete. So it's not a one-to-one relationship with the client, they are shared amongst the various clients, right? So we have come to the end of our first tutorial. I hope it has been very informative, and just to give you a rundown of the next couple of chapters that we're going to discuss. The next chapter that we're going to discuss, we're going to be talking about the 3 types of session bins that we just spoke about now. We're going to be discussing about them in detail, which is the stateless session bin, the singleton, and the stateful. After that, we're going to look at the MDB in detail. We're going to look at EJB persistence in detail, where we'll be making use of that entity bin. We're going to look at EJB security. We're going to look at EJB interceptors. We're going to look at EJB transaction management, amongst a couple of other topics that I'm going to be looking at, right? So thank you for joining me for this first tutorial. Hope to have you again in the next tutorial. Thank you.